All right, so we're going to get started. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to finish up cells, and then we're going to start talking about tissues. Not the kind that you see into or blow your nose in, but the tissues that make up our very body. And I love tissues because I love looking through the microscope, and it's so cool to see the world that we don't usually see with our naked eye. Before we do, so COVID is really active in our community right now. So we have over 160 active cases of COVID, which is a huge change. Right? We used to maybe have either active cases here, this brown line, we used to maybe have 25 in any given day or week. Now we have over 160. So there are a lot of people who are infected. These are people who've been confirmed cases, so they tested positive. Each one of those cases, right, so 160 active cases, each one of those people, of course, is people they've been in close contact with. And so those people are at risk of being infected themselves and need to quarantine. So contact tracers are trying to track those people down, but I can tell you they are overwhelmed, right? So 160 people, right, over 100 of them diagnosed in just the last week, and trying to call all of those people as individual close contacts. So now is the time to be extra cautious because there are people who are walking around who don't even know that they were close contacts yet. We haven't been able to get a hold of them on the phone. So be as careful as you can be, please. Although most young people will be totally fine with this virus, not everyone will, and you can't always predict who that will be. Also, of course, you are not in a bubble, and you interact in our community, and there are many people in our community who could get seriously ill. So please do what you can to try to keep this under control. Any questions about COVID? You can get tested at the student health services for free. You have to call them, and make an online appointment for that. They have to control how many there are coming in. Yeah.
Were they maybe the long? I heard it in something were the long.
Right, so it's a respiratory virus that can infect lots of different parts of your body. So you might remember those ACE2 receptors, and we talked about all the different things proteins can be. Proteins can be receptors on cells. And that ACE2 receptor is a place that the virus can dock on and gain entry into the cell. So any place in the body that has a lot of ACE2 receptors is vulnerable to infection with this virus. So we talked about the nose and the throat, right, which is why wearing a mask over your nose as well as your mouth is so important. Then also the lungs have a lot of ACE2 receptors. So they tend to get very heavily infected by this virus, which causes a huge inflammatory reaction. And we get tons of fluid and pus and stuff building up in people's lungs. And that causes the respiratory failure that we see in people who get severely ill. Interestingly, there are also ACE2 receptors on the inside lining of your blood vessels. And so we're also seeing what we would call vascular blood vessel effects from this virus. So in some people it's causing blood clots to form that then travel through their blood vessels and lodge and cause problems in their lungs, in their brain. We've seen some young people not here in this community as yet with strokes because of the blood vessels getting inflamed. Also, the kidneys need to be pretty infected as well, as can the intestines, right? So it's a very multi-talented virus that can cause lots of different types of effects. So remember the most common symptoms that people get if they get some sore throat. Lots of things cause that, right? Congestion, fever, headache, fatigue, muscle aches, loss of taste or smell, and maybe even some nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea for extra. Most people who get infected with the virus don't have all of those symptoms. You might only have one or two. You might even have none. But it can still be infected in other people. It's a tricky one.
Yeah. So if you're asymptomatic and you're just a carrier of COVID, does that mean that you still have the potential to have the lung problems, just not, or like any of these issues, just not displaying them?
So that's a really good question. The question is, if you're asymptomatic, so you have the virus, you're infected with it, you're asymptomatic, can you still get those problems with those body organs that we talked about, like the lungs? Yes, but we don't know how important it is. So, for example, there was a study in China, of course, where this all started, where a lot of our data comes from, looking at people who were completely asymptomatic. More than 30% of them had inflammation in their lungs on CT scan or chest X-ray. They membranes and get MRIs and stress tests and all kinds of things. So we just don't know, right, if these things are mild and they'll heal on their own, or if they're going to cause long-term problems down the road. We don't know yet. So good question. Other question. All right. Okay. So last time we talked about the plasma membrane, that semi-permeable membrane that lets some things through, doesn't let other things through, right? So self versus non-self. This is my dance space, this is your dance space, and the only things that can go through the plasma membrane are things that are small, non-polar molecules, right? So they have to be small and not have a charge. They're going to move according to their concentrations, right? So we're going to move down, we're going to want to move down the concentration gradient from an area where our solutes, such as oxygen and glucose, is at high concentration to a place where it's at low concentration. That happens passively, right? That's diffusion. If it has a charge, like glucose, for example, we're going to need to make a special doorway for it, and that's called facilitated diffusion. So it couldn't cross the membrane on its own. If we want to do something against its concentration gradient, like sodium, we don't want a lot of sodium inside our cells, but we do want a lot outside our cells. We need to do active transport, which is then going to require a protein pump to do the work, and ATP to fuel that work. We then talk about osmosis and tonicity. So osmosis is movement of water, and it will tend to move from an area where there is a low concentration of the solute to an area where there is high concentration of the solute. We're going to try to water it down. Right? And so we have these words, hypotonic meaning less concentrated than the inside of the cell. Isotonic meaning hypertonic more than that. And that's going to tell us what the cells might do if we put them in that type of solution. We have a really large substance, we're going to do endocytosis and exocytosis, right? That invagination or surrounding by the plasma membrane. Then we talk about organelles. So of course the nucleus is the center of the cell, and the reason why it is that's where our DNA is, which is our genes. Our genes are the code for how to make all the different proteins that are our structures, our enzymes, allow all of our chemical reactions to happen. So that's the mastermind. DNA itself can't leave the nucleus. We wouldn't want it to. So we have RNA that we use as a messenger. So we have mRNA or messenger RNA. And there's going to be an extra credit assignment I'm going to post for you later this week, looking at some of the current COVID vaccine candidates that actually use mRNA as their mechanism.
I just wanted to make sure, are you recording this?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So RNA also we have ribosomal RNA, and ribosomal RNA is what makes our ribosomes. Ribosomes are these protein factories located out in the cell or on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So the rough ER makes and modifies proteins. The smooth ER makes and modifies phospholipid intensification reactions like in the liver cells when they detoxify alcohol for you. Golgi apparatus, think of it like Amazon or UPS, kind of your shipping and receiving. Receive things, modifies them, sends them out where they need to go, and also makes lysosomes. And that's the last thing we talked about last week. The lysosomes are digesters. They digest food molecules and break it down into smaller substances that the cell can use. They digest old, worn out organelles, right, that we need to replace. And they can also digest other cells, right? So if a white blood cell, your immune cell, for example, takes in some bacteria by endocytosis, you will then use some lysosomes to break down those bacteria cells. We talked about, as an example, the disease called Tay-Sachs disease, which is a lysosomal disease, it's genetic defect where the lysosomes in the nervous system don't work, and it's universally fatal. So lysosomes are important. All right. Something new. The mitochondria. You know what the mitochondria are, right? The mitochondria are the
Powerhouse of the cell.
right, powerhouse of the cell. So they are powerhouse of the cell. They make our energy currency for cells, which is called what? Let's carbohydrates that we talked about before. Let's see if I have a better marker. All right. So let's see. Right. So our carbohydrates, protein, and lipids, right? Like the fats and oils that we eat. All of these we can use their breakdown products. The mitochondria can use their breakdown products to make ATP. But here's the interesting thing. We're really good at making ATP out of carbohydrates. Very efficient. We're very good. When we break carbohydrates down, we break them down into their sugars, and then it's easy to turn that into glucose, and that's what the mitochondria can use to make ATP. One glucose molecule ends up with 36 ATP. It's really good. The problem with proteins and lipids is when we break them down, what are their subunits? So the subunits of proteins are amino acids, and the subunits of lipids are fatty acids. Right? Of the lipids that we tend to eat, fats and oils, and those triglycerides, free fatty acids, and glycerol. So we have to then convert those amino acids or those fatty acids into glucose so that then the mitochondria can make ATP out of it. This is very inefficient. A lot of potential energy gets lost along the way. So have you ever heard of like the ketogenic diet? Right? Keto, right? So if all you eat is this is supremely inefficient. And what happens is a lot of the caloric energy in what we eat gets wasted as a product called ketones. Ketones are a waste product of trying to use fat and protein for energy. We can't use ketones, we lose calories. So that's why ketogenic diets work. That's why they're called ketogenic diets. Genic means creating, like Genesis. Right? So they generate ketones as a waste product. This is supremely inefficient. Our bodies don't like to do it unless they absolutely have to. Waste good calories. Okay? So these work as much as any diet works. Most diets don't work long term. A lot of people like to lose weight. We have a lot of mechanisms to fight it. So, mighty mitochondria are going to make the ATP. Without your mitochondria, you cannot do anything. And in fact, in order to make ATP from carbohydrates or proteins or lipids, the mitochondria must use oxygen. And so the whole reason that you have to breathe in is to get oxygen for your mitochondria. That's the only thing we use it for. Pretty crazy when you think about it. I mean, if you're reading it, I'm like, mind blown. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just because, so this might be a stupid question, but if carbohydrates are really good at being converted into energy, why is it so many people get like a food coma after they eat a ton of carbs?
Oh, that's a really good question. So why do people get a food coma after they eat a whole bunch of carbs? And it has to do with when you eat a big meal, the hormones that your body releases. Right? Those good like Thanksgiving hormones. So yeah. You're making a lot of energy even if you feel sleepy. Good question. Other questions? All right. So last are the centrioles. These are these little things located in the cell. I always think they look like licorice spikes. These little guys in the cell. And they're just these little bundles, and they make things called microtubules, which are really important for mitosis. I'm not too excited about them. Other biologists probably are. I don't find them particularly compelling, but that's what they do. All right, so we move on to tissue. All right. tissues are, by definition, groups of similar cells that work together to perform a specific function. So a tissue is a group of similar cells that are working together to perform a specific function. Right? A whole bunch of them, all the same kind of cell or similar types of cells, working together as a team. We only have 4 types. There are lots of subtypes, but we only have 4 main categories of tissues. Everything that your body is one of these 4 types of tissues. So the first one is epithelium. So epithelium forms coverings, outer coverings and inner coverings of the body surfaces. Okay, so it forms lines, outer lines and inner lines, coverings, and a protective role. Connective tissue does what you would think it does. It helps connect and bind things together. It also supports body parts, right? So nothing too earth-shattering there. But there's also some special ones that do special things. And so we'll talk about that today. Muscle tissue you're pretty familiar with results in movement, right? So it moves the body and its parts. And then nervous tissue receives stimuli and sends stimuli out, right? So it receives and sends out information via nerve impulses, right? So it's a communication system for our bodies. So we're going to go one by one through all 4 of these, and I'm going to introduce you to all the different members of each family. So I just made it to you. Whole body is 4 tissues. But there are some. So here we go. All right, there they all are. We're going to talk about them. Oh, I can't go back to the recording. Never mind. So this is epithelium. Okay? Your skin is your outer covering between you and the outside world. That is epithelium. The inside of your mouth is covered with epithelium. The surface of your tongue, the inside of your oral cavity here. This happens to be inside of somebody's abdominal wall. Right? So this abdominal wall and inside of there, it's like a container inside of there, all like that. The inside surface of my abdominal wall looks like this. Hopefully it doesn't have the effect. Right? Looks like this. I usually don't get your picture taken unless it's something I know. Okay. So epithelium is super important because it is a protective barrier. Right? That's its function. Its primary function is a protective barrier. So for example, this is the inside of somebody's stomach. You can see this nice shiny layer. This is normal epithelium. And this right here, that's a sore. That's a gastric ulcer. Right? That's a place where their epithelium has been damaged, and now their stomach acid is like eating away into the wall of their stomach. The epithelium is super important. And it's going to be specialized in different parts of the body to be able to protect us against certain types of things. This can be customized. So, this is all of that same information in text, which is going to be slide. Some more pictures of epithelium from inside people's bodies, because you can see this stuff every day, so I think it's kind of cool. So, this is the inside of somebody's abdominal wall. This is their liver, part of it, gallbladder, and part of their intestines. And I think you can appreciate that everything is covered with this thin, slippery film, right? Thin, slippery membrane. That's epithelium. Inside our guts like this, we have this nice thin, slippery thing so that everything can move and be frictionless. So when I do that, it doesn't like, I don't get itchy, I get along. Here's another picture inside the abdomen. This is somebody's appendix. Kind of cool to see. Okay, so you can see that thin, fleshy membrane. That's epithelium too. So, structure of epithelium. The structure of epithelium is we have densely packed cells that form a continuous layer. So densely packed cells with no holes, no spaces, sitting on top of what's called a basement membrane, which is like a layer, like peanut butter, made out of carbohydrates and protein, for the cells to stick on. So densely packed cells on top of a basement membrane. And so you have an outside environment, which for my skin is like the outside world, and the inside environment, which for my skin is the tissues underneath my skin. Inside my mouth, right, is different. So epithelium, tightly packed cells on a basement membrane. We have different types of epithelium, and they are named according to how many layers and what shape are the cells. So we're just going to learn these 5 types of epithelium. There are some other ones, but we're going to learn these 5. So in terms of how many layers of cells you have, we can have either simple epithelium or stratified. So, simple, by definition, means we just have one layer of cells. Stratified just means more than one layer. So that's going to be the first word that we use to describe epithelium. And the second word is going to refer to the shape of the cells. So you can have 3 different shapes. You can have squamous, which means flat. You can have cuboidal, which means square, cube shape. Or you can have columnar, which is like a column, like a 3-dimensional rectangle. Okay? So that's how we're going to name epithelium. We're going to go through each of these in turn, each of these 5. So, simple squamous epithelium. Simple means one layer of cells, squamous, flat cells. They literally look like fried eggs. This is what they look like underneath the microscope if we tease them out and separate them from each other. But now you'll recall that definition of epithelium is they're tightly packed with no spaces. So in reality, this is what they look like. So I think it looks like a whole bunch of fried eggs if there were no spaces in between. So that's simple squamous epithelium. So this is our thinnest, most delicate type of epithelium. You might think, well, what good is a lining or a protective barrier if it's thin and delicate? The answer is not much good. We're only going to use it in a few places. We're only going to use it in places where we need diffusion to happen quickly and easily. Where we need molecules to be able to move from one side of the cell across the cell into another type of tissue without difficulty. Any ideas where that might be? Two places, just 2. In the lungs. So in the air sacs of the lungs, we need oxygen to be able to get across the air sacs of our lungs really quickly and get into our bloodstream. We need carbon dioxide to be able to get out of our bloodstream and out into the air sacs so we can exhale it. So we're going to find simple squamous epithelium in the air sacs of the lungs. They're called alveoli. You might remember that. And we'll talk about that in the respiratory system. We're also going to find simple squamous epithelium as the walls of the tiniest blood vessels. Because it is the tiniest blood vessels where exchange of nutrients and gases is happening with the tissues. So we're going to find this in our capillaries, the tiniest blood vessels. And sometimes we'll also see it in some of those really thin membranes. They're just there for safety friction, right? But not anything for you protection. This is in places primarily where you need rapid diffusion of nutrients or gases across the tissue. So in the air sacs of the lungs, the alveoli, and in our small blood vessels. That's the most famous. Now let's contrast that with stratified squamous. So again, the cells are flat. Now if you look at this diagram, you're going to be like, Dr. causing my throat and esophagus to be bleeding all the place, right? So you can eat kind of jagged edge things, you're not terribly jagged edge, right? And you're not going to end up bleeding and all cut up for it. Because we have all of these cells that are protecting, many layers of cells. So we're going to see stratified squamous epithelium in places where you use durability. Right? So hallmark of stratified squamous epithelium is durability and resilience. So we're going to find it in the throat, the esophagus, right? The food tube that goes down to your stomach when you swallow. We're also going to find this in the vagina, thankfully, right? Number one simple squamous, we are trying to have sex. I mean, maybe it could be a nightmare. So, stratified squamous epithelium. This is also serviced by tongue inside of your throat. We gotta get that. Durable and resilient. More pictures. So you might notice that, like, oh, these are pink, these are purple. The interesting thing about cells is they don't really have much of a color. So in order to be able to see them better under a microscope, we actually use dyes that we call stains. And so depending on what type of stain we use, they will be different colors. So sometimes they'll look pink, sometimes they'll look purple, sometimes they'll look blue, sometimes they'll look red, sometimes orange. It depends on what stain you're using. Right? It's something we use to highlight the structure. Because on its own, it doesn't have much color to it. This is a different type of stratified squamous epithelium that has something extra. It has a protein on top of it called keratin. So we call it keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So again, it has many cell layers. The uppermost ones are flat, so it's stratified squamous. And these wavy things here are keratin, which is protein. Any idea where I would find keratinized stratified squamous epithelium? James? This is our skin, absolutely. This is what our skin looks like under the microscope. Pretty cool. So that keratin makes it tougher, makes it even more protective, right? So the only difference between the inside of the vagina and your skin is keratin. That's the only difference. The other ones look exactly the same in the microscope. Almost. Very close. So keratin is going to make it stronger and tougher and give it some waterproof. So that's good. When we take a bath, we don't immediately blow up due to osmosis. That's good. So keratin is super important. And the difference between this skin on the inside of your forearm, which is really thin, and the skin on the palm of your hand is how much keratin it has. Pretty cool. That keratin happens to be produced by these cells. They start down here. As they grow up and mature, they move towards the top. This is continually happening like an escalator. The farther away they get from the blood vessels, which are down here, the harder it is for them to survive. So they're continually dying. They leave behind the keratin that they have produced, and they slop off. Right? So even though you only use your towel after the shower when you are clean, you still have to wash your towel. Because your towel gets full of dead skin cells that you shed. Yeah.
So like we're continually like sloughing off our skin. Why is it like when someone gets a burn they'll always have like scars?
So scars, and another related question would be tattoos, right? How does that work? And the answer to that question is those two things don't just impact this layer, they impact down here. And we'll talk about skin next time. Other questions about keratinized stratified squamous epithelium? Mouth. Yeah. Yeah. So you're born with more keratin on the palm of the soul, on the skin in those places, than you are on other places of your body. And then, of course, based on your activity, right? So if you're using your hand a lot, people who are lifting weights in the gym, or I go to crew in college, right? So on boards and everything, right? In response have more keratin here, but not a lot more. Not until we start to use it. Big and skinny full of your stuff, guys. Okay, so squamous epithelium, right? We have three different types. Simple squamous, one layer, delicate. Stratified squamous, many layers, resilient. And then keratinized stratified squamous, which is our skin. All right. Next, cuboidal. Simple cuboidal. One layer of cube-shaped cells. These always remind me of marshmallows. They're like little marshmallows. So here's like one little cell with its nucleus, here's another cell. Like little marshmallows all lined up next to each other with polka dots in the middle. Here is simple cuboidal epithelium, and they're all making a ring. It's like a little ring made out of marshmallows. So simple cuboidal epithelium has kind of special powers. Simple cuboidal epithelium can secrete and absorb substances, and it can also produce fluid, things like sweat. So simple cuboidal is pretty cool. This is actually a diagram of the thyroid gland. So glands, parts of our body that produce liquid substances, are frequently made of simple cuboidal epithelium. It's little tube-shaped stuff. We also have simple columnar. So rectangular cells all lined up next to each other. I think of them kind of like, right? Those are all lined up together. And their nuclei are all about the same level. This one we kind of didn't get it cut quite through. We kind of cut through at an angle, so it looks different. So simple columnar epithelium, we find this in interesting places. We find this on the inside of our intestines. So the inner lining of our intestines, where we're going to absorb nutrients, that's one of the places that we find simple columnar epithelium. And in that location, it has these little interesting things. I don't know if you can kind of see, there's like this little fringe on top of the cells. A little fringe kind of sticking up. Okay. A little fringe sticking up on the top of each of the cells. Those are called microvilli. And they help increase the surface area for absorbing more nutrients. In the fallopian tube, we also have simple columnar epithelium. And they have a different cellular feature that looks just like microvilli, except it's a little bit taller, called cilia. This is the first time we talk about cilia. So cilia are like these little hairs that stick out from the cell, and they do this wave motion. They go, and what the cilia and the fallopian tube do is when an egg is released, they move it through the fallopian tube down to the uterus, so that hopefully the baby doesn't try to go in the fallopian tube. That would be bad. We need to get it into the uterus. So simple columnar epithelium, we're going to find it in the intestines. We're going to find it in where it will have microvilli. To increase surface area, we'll find it in the fallopian tube where it's going to have cilia and the egg. Yes.
So, in an ectopic pregnancy, would it be because the son has this
Exactly. So an ectopic or a tubal pregnancy happens when the cilia aren't working properly, usually due to some scarring from a previous infection. Absolutely. All right. Here's some more pictures of simple columnar epithelium. I think this is really cool. Sometimes it has special cells in it called goblet cells. If you have a goblet, which is like kind of like a big water glass, somebody thought this kind of looks like a big water glass with a stem. This is a goblet cell. It produces mucus. So that's how we keep things nice and slippery and friction-free inside our intestines as our food moves through. If we have these goblet cells that make mucus. Okay. All right. Last one. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So this is columnar epithelium, rectangular cells that look like there's many layers because the nuclei are at all different levels, but they're actually just trying to psych you out. It's just one layer of cells, but it just kind of looks like it's many, hence the name pseudostratified. These usually also have cilia, and these are found in the lining of your trachea, your windpipe, and your bronchi. And those cilia also do the whoosh, thing and move mucus and stuff up out of your lungs. Help clear out your lungs. Here's another picture. Sometimes they have goblet cells too, these clear bubbles. Those are goblet cells, cilia up top. Right? So I think of it kind of like this. It's still just a single line of people, but at varying heights. So that's why it's pseudostratified. It looks like it's multiple layers, but it's really different. So that's it for epithelium. Okay? So we classify it by how many layers of cells and what shapes they are. Oh, I forgot one more thing. Epithelium, right? Also, glands are made of epithelium. So this is a sweat gland. If we zoom in on it, each one of these little tiny things is a simple cuboidal cell making sweat. I kind of referred to that earlier. Sometimes glands are just one cell, like the goblet cells, making mucus. Sometimes multiple cells, like sweat glands. There's the whole family. And we're recording. Okay, so moving on. Next family, connective tissue family. This is a weird family. They don't seem all that similar to each other, except for the first three. So the general structure of connective tissue is two things. You have specialized cells in an extracellular matrix. So extracellular means it's around and outside of the cell. It's the matrix, right? Until now, it's just stuff. Right? Matrix is stuff that the cells are in. And that stuff is usually some goo and some protein fibers. So we'll take a look at that. So our first one, loose connective tissue, also called areolar connective tissue. You'll see both terms used. So we have special cells in this tissue called fibroblasts because they're going to make fibers. Blast means making. Fibroblasts. So F-I-B-R-O-B-L-A-S-T-S. So on the left, we have a diagram, and on the right, this is an actual microscopic image of loose connective tissue. So these little purple things that look kind of like dark magenta over here are the fibroblasts. They're sitting in the goo and making these fibers. So we have strong collagen fibers, and then we have some stretchy elastic fibers. And they're all very sparse and spread out and haphazard and going every which way. So loose connective tissue is what it sounds like, right? It's pretty loose, it's pretty unstructured, it's relatively delicate. So it only provides gentle support, right? This isn't very tough. In fact, when you do cavity dissections or when you do surgery on somebody, you can just go through loose connective tissue. You can just part it with your fingers. Right? It's really kind of flimsy because it's just giving gentle support. And I think I have an image. Yeah. So this is inside somebody's body. This happens to be a muscle. This happens to be some adipose tissue. And you see this cobwebby-like stuff? This is loose connective tissue. And it really behaves like the fake cobwebs that you buy for Halloween decorations. Right? You can just So this is loose connective tissue. So gentle support. We find it around a lot of our organs. We find it around a lot of our blood vessels and nerves. We bundling them together. So loose connective tissue gives you gentle support. This is the cobwebby stuff. Contrast that with dense, regular connective tissue. So we're going to have two types of dense connective tissue. The first one is regular. Regular is referring to how these protein fibers are arranged. So if we look at this diagram, we've got fibroblasts, same type of specialized cells from before, fibroblasts. They make fibers. And in the case of dense regular connective tissue, they are making collagen fibers. We had collagen fibers before. But this time, they are densely packed, right? There's not a lot of space here. And they're all in parallel. They're running in parallel with each other. So it's called dense regular connective is because it's really good tensile strength. Really good strength in one direction. I could sing in one direction, honestly, I don't know any. So missed opportunity there, right? So just in one direction, just tensile strength. Imagine multiple strands of rope together, like each of those collagen fibers is rope, right? And if you try to hang something or pull on that, right, it's going to be really strong. They're not particularly strong in the opposite direction, however. So there is some vulnerability, right? It's really strong in one direction. Any idea where we might use this type of tissue?
Ligaments?
Yeah, absolutely. So ligaments and tendons are made out of dense, regular connective tissue. They're really, really strong, right? Think about somebody lifting, like, I don't know, massive amounts of weight, right? So however many pounds are pulling on that tendon in order to move their bones. So I'm going to show you a picture of some of these Achilles tendons. This is an image from an operating room. So if you're like my brother who would like totally pass out cold if you saw that, I'm going to ask you not look. I'll let you know when it's safe. So this is the Achilles tendon. Obviously, in this person, it's torn, which is why they're in surgery. Really cool. Tendons and ligaments have almost a silvery, shiny white appearance to them from all that collagen arranged in parallel. They're really quite pretty. Okay, you can look again. So, dense regular was for tendons and ligaments. Really good tensile strength in one direction. But there are places in our body where we need really good strength, but in multiple planes, in multiple directions. So we're going to do dense again, because we want lots of those strong collagen fibers. We're going to have the fibroblasts again to make them. But this time, the fibers, instead of all being oriented in parallel, are going to go every which way. So we're going to use the word irregular. It's referring to how they're patterned. Right? So dense, irregular connective tissue. I have collagen fibers going this way, and this way, and this way. They're going every which way. So it's almost like a three-dimensional net now, made out of rope. So it's really strong in multiple directions. Any idea where we have this? We have it, but it's a pretty thin layer of it. This is actually what we find in the deeper layer of our skin. Right? My skin, I can stretch this way, I can stretch it that way, I can stretch it this way, and it doesn't rip, it doesn't tear. That's because of dense, irregular connective tissue. Pretty cool. Alright, so again, this is going to be a real image so we can get into stitches so we can see inside the skin. So close your eyes if you don't want to see it, and I apologize it's blurry. This is the surface of the skin, which is that keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. But down here, this thick stuff is the dense, irregular connective tissue. This is underneath. Right? So that undersurface of our skin. You can look now. You interact with dense, irregular connective tissue all the time. Leather. We take an animal's hide, scrape the stuff off of it, we tan it so it doesn't rot. Leather is the part of the skin or the hide that is dense, irregular connective tissue. It is strong in multiple directions. Yes, it can stretch out, but it's really quite strong. Okay, so you know this material quite well. All right, here are our three fibrous connective tissues. We've got the loose cobwebby one, dense regular, and dense irregular. They all have fibroblasts, which make these collagen fibers. Right? These collagen supplements, and say, oh, for better skin and fewer wrinkles. Right? They're thinking it's going to help you make better dense irregular connective tissue. They won't really, probably, but that's okay. All right. Next. Another connective tissue. Strange, looks very different. Everyone. This is adipose tissue. You know it is fat. Right? So adipose tissue is made up of cells. This is one cell, this is one cell. Kind of looks like chicken wire, called adipocytes. So A-D-I-P-O, adipocytes, C-Y-T-E. mouth has to hold that lipid, otherwise it will leak all over the place. So, adipose tissue does three main important things for us. Certainly, yes, it's an energy storage form, right? So we store excess energy as adipose, right? Put that extra lipid, we convert it into lipid, put it into a storage form. So it's energy storage. See this through a long winter. It's also insulation, right? People who don't have a lot of subcutaneous body fat, they get colder faster, right? So eat your cookies, winter is coming, okay? So insulation. And then the third thing is cushioning, which we've mentioned before. So cushioning around a lot of our organs, including cushioning around our heart, remember? So if I go like this, I'm not going to bruise my heart against the inside of my ribcage, even though my heart is knocking against it, because I have that nice fatty cushion on it. So insulation, cushioning, and energy storage. Three functions. That's really important.
So this is something that I've heard a lot of times is like adipose tissue or like the fat cells themselves don't really ever disappear, they just shrink.
That is true.
Okay.
So once you have adipose cells, those adipocytes, they are with you forever. The only thing that changes if you gain or lose weight, gain or lose fat, is how much lipid is inside each individual one. The one exception to that would be if you have liposuction, right? You want to actually suck out fat cells, which is kind of a barbaric procedure actually. And then you just end up putting that extra lipid in other places, and then you get weird contours. Quite strange. So yeah, every fat cell you have, you will always have for the most part. So just get bigger. All right. Now we're going to really weird cousins. Okay, these are connective tissues, but you wouldn't really think of them as kind of connecting things. So on the one side, we have the supportive ones that are going to provide structural support for cartilage and bone. And then we have two liquid ones. It sounds really weird that blood or lymph could actually be connecting things, but this is how they get classified. So we're going to go one by one. Hyocartilage. So cartilage, this is a specific type of cartilage. We're going to talk about in this class. And what you have is this very glassy, smooth matrix. And then you have these little caves called lacunae, L-A-C-U-N-A for the plural, or for the singular, A-E for the plural. And inside of those live the little cells that actually make this tissue, called chondrocytes, C-H-O-N-D-R-O sites. So the chondrocytes are living in these lacuna, these little caves, these little nooks and crannies inside this matrix which they are maintaining. And the cool thing about cartilage is this matrix is kind of smooth and slippery and rubbery, and it has a little bit of give to it. It actually has some elastic fibers in it that has a kind of glassy appearance to it. This is a diagram here, right? So we see our matrix, our lacunae with the chondrocytes living inside of it. This always reminds me of grape jello with some fruit in it. My grandma used to make grape jello with bananas in it. I love it. But so it's this very kind of smooth, glassy stuff. So it's almost like really, really tough jello with these little spaces inside that for the cells to live. So where do we find that? So you know that you have cartilage right in your nose, in your ears, right? Those types of cartilage are slightly different from this particular type of cartilage. This particular type of cartilage, we find Yeah, so that's a really good question. So if somebody gets a knee replacement, usually an older person, we can't restore the cartilage very well at all. So when we give somebody a new knee, we literally give them like a metal knee. And sometimes they'll put like little special plastic polymers on to kind of mimic the cartilage, but sometimes the metal itself is just fine. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I could bring you a picture of knee replacement X-ray. Alright, the bone. So we talked about cartilage, glassy, smooth substance. Bone is pretty different. So again, we have a special name for our cells. Osteo is the prefix that means bone. Ortho is the prefix that also often means bone. But so osteocytes, like means cell. They are also located in little caverns, little caves, within the matrix. Because the matrix for bone, as you probably could have guessed, is pretty darn hard, right? Made mostly out of calcium salts. That's why people say you need to drink your milk and get your calcium to keep your bone strength up, okay? There's also some collagen fibers in there, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the skeletal system. So let's look at it under the microscope. It's really cool looking. I love looking at bone under the microscope. It has these interesting concentric rings. And what I want to draw your attention to are these little black, kind of ovoid, flat things. Those are the lacunae. And the cells live in there. Everything else that you're seeing is this hard matrix made of calcium phosphate. Right? So that's where we get the hardness of our bones. So the cells are living in the lacunae. The osteocytes are living in the lacunae. We'll learn more about this structure when we do the skeletal system, but it's just super cool looking under the microscope. That's what your bones look like. Questions about bones? Yeah.
So the osteons, what are those floating in?
So none of this is floating.
Okay.
It's all of these things all packed against each other. It's like solid, except for the little caves where the cells live and little tunnels in the middle that the blood vessels travel in. Mm-hmm. Blood is a connective tissue. Kind of abstract, really, but it's considered a connective tissue. So the specialized cells that we have for blood, your red blood cells, which are called erythrocytes. Erythro means red, E-R-Y-T-H-R-O, erythrocytes. Your white blood cells, of which there are several different types, your lysosomes, which are your immune cells. And then we have these little tiny guys, which are platelets. And they are all floating in an extracellular matrix, which in this case is a liquid extracellular matrix. So, early on we looked at some that were just kind of goo, and then bone, it was really hard, calcium-based extracellular matrix. Well, for blood, it's liquid. We call it plasma. So if you've ever donated plasma, for example, or heard of someone who has, that is the liquid component of the blood. So when somebody donates plasma, right, they take the blood out through your veins, and then they separate out the cells from the liquid part. And they give the person back the cells, and they keep the liquid part, the plasma. Why, you might ask? It's very complicated. We'll get to it later when we talk about blood. All right. That's blood. Lymph. So lymph is kind of like the odd cousin that everybody forgets to invite to the family reunion. So lymph we don't talk about a whole lot. So if you've ever skinned your knee, it'll bleed a little bit, right? And then if you put a Band-Aid on it, and sometimes you get that kind of like clear to yellowish meat on the Band-Aid, and it's kind of leak out. That is lymph. very much. It's hard to kind of see, it's hard to measure. These things are tiny, unlike blood vessels. But it can be really important. For example, this is an individual who has had surgery for breast cancer that involved removing the lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes from the armpit under their left arm. And so what happens then, this is gone, so the fluid around the cells here now can't get back. So this is called lymphedema. Edema means swelling. Swelling due to lymph, lymphedema of the left arm. So we don't seem to appreciate our lymphatic system until it's not working properly. That's one. So here's the connective tissue family. We've got our fibrous ones with our fibroblasts, loose, dense regular for tendons and ligaments, and dense irregular for the deep layer of the skin. Adipose for cushioning, energy storage, and insulation. And then we have the specialized ones, hyaline cartilage, such as at the end of our bones, bone itself, and blood. Lymph I didn't picture because it's mostly just fluid. There aren't very many cells in it. There's a few immune cells, but that's about it. All right. I think I have, yes. Let me just check on our time. All right. I have another technique, but we don't have time for it. So I'm going to post it to Canvas so you can do it on your own and check your knowledge. Okay? Let's talk about muscles. Literally love muscles, so I'm going to talk about muscles. All right, so the other links here are other video clips of seeing these muscles in action. Yeah.
I was just going to say my muscle and my cousin are both pilots, and then why most of the pilots like that with the breathing, and they are really transferred them under a number of different machines.
That is so cool, right? So she said she had family members who are pilots for life flight teams, which are the teams that when somebody does donate their organs, right? So once the surgical team harvests those organs, they fly them to where the recipient is, the person who's going to get that organ transplant. Really important organ. It has to be done really quickly, and you have to keep it on ice. And it's crazy that we're able to even do that. Amazing. All right. So muscular tissue as a whole, right? The whole point is that it is contractile. It can contract. That's what makes it muscle. Okay? We have special names for muscle cells. We call them myocytes. Myo is the prefix for muscle, myocytes. Now, they are also called muscle fibers. That means the same thing. That means muscle cell. That means myocyte. I, in particular, find that phrase muscle fiber confusing. So I don't use it. When I think of fibers, I think of other things, but I don't think of that as a cell. So I will always use the term myocyte. There's two really important proteins inside myocytes called actin and myosin that we'll get to learn about later in the semester. And remember there are three types of muscle that I've already introduced you to. So skeletal, smooth, sometimes also called visceral. Viscera is the guts, right, inner organs, and cardiac parts. So skeletal muscle is the muscle that you think of when you think of muscle. This is muscle that pulls on bones to result in movement. Right? So the interesting thing about skeletal muscle, when we look at it under the microscope, is that the cells are really long. They're really long. And there are these long cylinders. They have a striped appearance to them because of their actin and myosin filaments. So they're striped, we call that striated. They're long columns, and crazily, they have multiple nuclei. So this is part of one cell, and look, these are all nuclei inside of it. Here's another one, multiple nuclei. So they are multinucleated. So skeletal muscle cells are long cylindrical cells with their striated stripes, and they have multiple nuclei. They're the ones that attach to bones and end up resulting in movement of the skeleton. Hence the name skeletal muscle. These are voluntary, right? Cardiac muscle looks similar to skeletal muscle in that it is striped or striated. However, they are much shorter and tend to be branched, like this, and have only one or two nuclei. involuntary, interestingly, thank goodness. I can hardly like chew gum and talk at the same time. Imagine if I had to be like, okay, beats, thank goodness. It does its own thing, it's involuntary. Automatic. And then finally, smooth or visceral muscle. These cells don't have stripes. They are not striated. They are little flat, spindle-shaped cells, or kind of tapered cells. They don't have stripes or striations, and they only have a single nucleus. That's what those guys look like. And they are involuntary. This is what it looks like in the wall of the intestine. This is a whole bunch of smooth muscle. If I were to zoom in over here, I would see simple columnar epithelium lining each of these little finger-like things. This is another picture of another part of the intestine. This is smooth muscle, again, in the wall of it. Right? Anybody ever eat tripe? It's like cow stomach. It's considered a delicacy, right? Because meat is muscle, right? So this is smooth muscle. It's muscle. You can eat it. Thinking about that amino acids, right? All right. So our muscle tissue family, we have two striated ones, skeletal and cardiac, and two involuntary ones, cardiac and smooth. So three members of that. Our last category. Our last category of tissue. Nervous tissue. And there's only one member in this family. So when we look at nervous tissue, the only type of subtype of tissue we have for nervous tissue is nervous tissue. That's it. Family of one. There are two cell types that we're going to find in nervous tissue. The big ones, who are kind of the divas, the star of the show, are the neurons. Okay. So there's the big ones. And those are the cells that send and receive messages. So they're the ones that do the work the nervous tissue is famous for. The neuron is to send and receive messages. But there are other cells in nervous tissue that are kind of the support cells. Right? These little guys, all these little purple things, those are called neuroglia. N-E-U-R-O, glia, G-L-I-A, neuroglia. And they're the support staff, right? So this is, I don't know, name a celebrity. Who's a celebrity? Say again? Zac Efron, all right? So this is Zac Efron. This is his personal trainer. This is his publicist. This is his agent. This is his stylist. This is his house cleaner, right? This is all the support staff. So the job of the neuroglia is to support and protect the neuron. Right? It's the neuron that's going to send and receive messages and do the actual work of nervous tissue. And then the neuroglia are supporting the neuron in doing that work. So they support and protect and nourish the neuron. All right. So we're done. Okay? We went through all the tissue types that we're going to learn. And then when we come back on Thursday, we're going to look at how a lot of these tissue types work together in our skin. And we're going to talk more about homeostasis and the ways in which our skin contributes to maintaining that constant internal intensity. So thank you so much for your attention. If you didn't get a lab kit and need one, I have some up here. Please remember to clean out your desk before you leave. I have cloths up here. You can take it short, take it to your desk, wipe it off. And have a good day and be safe out there. Thank you.